We are in the Express Studio at the Community Media Center. My name is Jim Mayola, and it is Thursday, September 30th, 2010, the end of September. And it is my pleasure to be interviewing my good friend Dave Duree. Good morning, Dave. How are you today?
Good morning, Jim. I'm fantastic, but a little damp.
Yes, it is. It's a little rainy today, and it looks like it'll be rainy all day. Dave, you weren't born in Carroll County. You were born and raised someplace else. Where was that?
I was born in Halloween, 1941, in Indianapolis, Indiana, just a couple months before Pearl Harbor.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, do you remember, I mean, you were a little boy during World War II. Do you remember any of that?
I don't remember the war as a child.
Right.
My father had what they called a critical job in that he worked at RCA, and they were building radios for planes.
Oh, okay.
And so they wouldn't let him join the service. So he stayed at home, and there wasn't much talk about the war. Neither was there that I can recall around the church and the family, like our extended family.
Right. So, as a little boy in Indianapolis, how long did you live there?
Well, I lived there through my high school graduation year of 1959.
Okay.
So I've been more years in Maryland than I was where I was born.
What was it like growing up in the, I guess you were growing up in the 40s and the early 50s. What was it like?
Well, the movies sometimes capture it pretty well. You know, I was out cruising with my friends, the drive-ins, the gals on roller skates sometimes, and they brought trays to your car. And everybody was talking to each other and getting out of their cars. And while it was, I think we remember them as fondly as great times, I also remember the dark side, where the drag races, where people were injured and maimed and killed, racing on the highways. And that was part of the culture. This was, goodness gracious, the 1957, 6, 7 through 9 muscle cars.
Right.
They had more horsepower than the body could really deal with.
Sure.
And so that was tragic, and there was quite a bit of that, as I recall, or at least it struck me that way.
So you grew up in Indianapolis, but you got involved in music probably at an early age, I'm going to guess.
I was 9 years old.
Okay.
I wanted to play the saxophone because I was watching performers on what little bit of TV we could get. Of course, it was black and white, and they usually played in a situation where the instrument gleamed and the keys glistened, and the sound was golden, and I thought, I want to do that.
Okay. So at the age of 9 in the 4th grade, you got involved in instrumental music.
Yes, and my first teacher, Mr. Bromley, was a vaudevillian. He played on the vaudeville venue around Indiana. And I'm not sure he was a clarinet teacher or a saxophone. I mean, clarinet player or a saxophone player, but music is music, and a lot of the folks could get a tune out or two. And he owned a music store. And so I had my first lessons with him, and my first disappointment was I was way too little for the saxophone.
Oh.
My hands wouldn't fit.
Okay.
It was too big.
Right.
So I was too little for the clarinet.
No kidding.
And so they had, today we see it as an E-flat clarinet. It's a little bitty thing.
Right.
And it only had a couple of extra keys on it.
Right.
But I could play that.
Okay.
So I began playing the clarinet.
So you began on the E-flat.
Yeah.
So that you at least learned the fingering and you learned how to control the notes and that kind of thing. So you developed your embouchure.
And not only that, I don't think he knew the clarinet literature all that much. So I was working out of violin books.
Wow.
And they didn't have the low range we do, but they go a lot higher.
Right.
And so it forced me to do things earlier in the upper register of the instrument than I would have probably with a conventional start.
A happy accident.
A lot of those in my life, I'm glad to say.
Okay. Let me ask you something before we go further into your life. You mentioned that you had a black and white television. When you were a little boy, did your family have a radio? Because
oh, yes.
That was before television.
Oh, yes.
Okay, because radio for a lot of people was the center, was the entertainment source.
The Lone Ranger, The Shadow, Fibber McGee and Molly.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness, yes. I remember I used to be a great fan of The Lone Ranger. The Dark Shadow, that kind of scared me.
Yeah.
And so I remember that, and I'm trying to remember the actor's name that was the Lone Ranger was Lou Broderick, I believe, who later had a TV show, had this big gravelly voice.
Right.
But he was the original Lone Ranger that I listened to on radio.
Yeah, it's interesting because the radio used to be the center, kind of the family center of entertainment in the 30s and the 40s. I mean, you'd listen to everything, sports, music, stories, and you let your imagination make the pictures for you.
Well, in fact, Fibber McGee and Molly is a great example, because every time he went to open that closet, you knew what was going to happen. And all the clatter, clanging, coming out of it, I could just envision, pieces of things and, toys and tools and who knew what that had been stuffed in there, and the door crammed shut. Yeah. And he opened it, of course, every show, and it was a wonderful moment.
And everybody waited for it and just cracked up.
And we knew it was coming.
Yeah, sure. And it was wonderful because it brought the whole family together to listen to that.
No. I've sort of been a Lone Ranger pretty most of my, and so I would listen to it to myself.
Okay.
Because I could enjoy it without distraction or interruption.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have 2 sisters.
Okay. And did your mom work?
No. That was the day of the stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. One dad that was making one wage and supported a family of 5.
Yes, and to supplement that wage that he was making in his daily professional life, my father, and I think I inherited a lot of this from him, is an original thinker, was an original thinker. And there's 2 things that I attribute in my life that I learned from him without him saying a word. And that a problem is the first opportunity for a solution. And he didn't spend a lot of time identifying the problem because he was well on his way to a solution. And as a result, he was a self-starter. And so he was building ham radios.
Wow.
He was a ham radio operator. He was one of the originals.
Wow.
W9PEV were his call letters, and they've gotten more complex now because there's so many more.
Sure.
And so he built his own radios, then he built them for others. Heathkit had kits that you could put together, and so he would put them together for other ham radio operators. And he ran across some interesting people. Bert Servas out in Indianapolis ended up owning Life magazine.
Wow.
And I remember going to Bert Servas' house to watch the Indianapolis 500 on his television because the screen was bigger than any of us could afford.
Yeah, sure.
And he also owned Corey Jane apron hoops, which were plastic hoops that went on an apron. You could just open it up and slip it on.
Yeah.
And he also had hula hoops later on. And my father helped set up the machine shop to build these things. So it was a fascinating array of experiences working with my father, helping him out as an electrician.
Very exciting. Now talk about television a little bit. When did you get your first television?
We got our first television when I was in high school. And the programming, of course, was very limited. And so we had the screen pattern that when there was nothing being broadcast, you had the local television station's logo as a pattern, and that's what you'd sit there and see if you were willing to wait.
Yes.
And then there was a lot of local programming. And in Indianapolis, Indiana is the home of basketball.
Right.
Oscar Robertson is one of my peers, and the Van Arsdale twins, and a bunch of folks that made it in the pros. And the state high school basketball tournament back in the 50s was $1 million affair.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they held the playoffs in the Butler University basketball arena and broadcast it from there all over the state. And I was fortunately there when the movie Hoosiers.
Right.
Okay. Well, Bobby Plump at I can't think of his local high school, was the main figure in this real life drama. And their school was so small that they didn't have a basketball gym. They had to go share one with a neighboring school by bus.
No kidding.
And he was a pure shooter, and they were in the final game of the playoffs. And it was one of those deals where the rules were different. So they basically, everybody knew what was going to happen. He held the ball for about 10 seconds. With 3 seconds to go, he shot. It swished. And they won the tournament.
Wow. Amazing.
That was the true story. There was a little different take on it in the movie, but I was there for the original.
No kidding.
Yes, sir.
Wow, what an experience.
Yes.
Amazing. So, television, when it first came out, was black and white.
Right.
It started about 7 o'clock in the morning. It ended about 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night with the national anthem.
That's right.
And the rest of the time, it was just, you'd see either just a snowy screen or the
test pattern.
The test pattern, yeah. How many channels did you get?
One.
No kidding.
Yeah, there was only one. Indianapolis is similar in size to Baltimore, and out in the Midwest.
Right.
Now Chicago was the action center, and we were a little far south for that to reach to us.
Right.
And so we only had one channel in the beginning, and I don't recall that being a big deal.
Yeah.
We did get all of the syndicated stuff, Sky King and Roy Rogers, and Hopalong Cassidy was my favorite cowboy.
Yeah.
So I watched a lot of that on Saturday. And the cartoons, oh my goodness. I still thrive on those.
Yes. Great stuff. Do you remember Terry Toons?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
But I was more into Woody Woodpecker. He just fascinated me because that cackle of his just really appealed.
Excellent. Okay, you went to high school in Indianapolis.
Yes.
And then what about college?
Well, actually, high school was an interesting experience too.
Okay.
It was Arsenal Technical Schools. It had a 75-acre campus.
Wow.
It was an arsenal during the Civil War, and our senior homerooms were in the Arsenal building.
Okay.
We had lunch in the artillery building on the first floor, and it was huge. And then on the second floor, this was a very large school and an incredibly progressive program for its day, because you could take vocational courses and come out equipped to practice as a professional in masonry, and they built little buildings and tore them down. You could learn about electricity. I took electric shop. We had generators and electric motors that were huge.
Wow.
I remember one time my friend Odell White and I were, I guess, kind of geeky, and we were experimenting with something. We had a generator going, three-phase generator, and we took one of the phases when they had a power outage on the other floor and ran cables over to the panel and powered up the second floor.
No kidding. Oh, gosh.
Well, there was a problem. We had a solution.
Wow, that's great. What an interesting experience. Now, is the high school still in operation?
Oh, yes. I go
in the same location?
Absolutely.
Amazing. What a great use for an old Civil War building. I guess it's Civil War.
It was Civil War, and the one graduating class had some class clowns that went out. We had these huge cannons from the era, and they painted polka dots on them. And it was a big scandal on the radio and everything until they caught them. Yeah. And they were not allowed to graduate until they removed the polka dots and repainted the cannons.
No kidding.
And the cannon, of course, was the school newspaper's name was the Arsenal Cannon. It was really an incredible place, and whenever I go back, I see new things about it. We had probably 5 or 6 buildings, scattered around the campus. The orchestra was held in the barn, and in every music program I've ever been in, at every college, the oldest building on the campus is the music building.
No kidding.
At McDaniel College, it's Levine Hall.
Right.
Over at Hood, it's Broadbeck, that was there before it was Hood College. And I don't know what there is about music, but it finds the old buildings.
No kidding.
And we were in the barn for the orchestra, and we were under the bleachers for the band room in the gymnasium.
Amazing.
It really was an incredible place. And of course, the ROTC fit right in.
Of course.
The original barracks where they had their headquarters.
Yeah, that was perfect. So, what did you decide to do for college?
Well, college was a difficult option then because there was the draft. And we hadn't been that far out of the Korean War. Now, I do remember that a lot more. I remember the comic books about the fighter planes and so forth over there. And after World War II, I became very involved with identifying World War II aircraft. And Indianapolis has as its center the War Memorial with what was then the monument was the tallest building in Indianapolis. Because of the shale underlying the area, the buildings couldn't be very tall.
Right.
And I remember seeing the bombers and the Corsair. That was my favorite plane, the Hellcat, all those World War II planes. And then I remember reading about the updates to those with the B-52 bomber coming in. And we don't realize how old that plane is. And so all of that kind of was there. And then there was the draft. And so I elected to take the military, do the draft, or volunteer.
Right.
And I wanted to do something in music. So they had what they called the kiddie cruise in the Navy.
Okay.
If you joined before your 18th birthday, didn't matter when,
Right.
you would get out the day before you were 21.
Wow.
So I joined 2 weeks before I was 18.
Yeah.
So my first tour of duty ended the day before I was 21. A little drama went along with that. I had won a lot of awards and competitions and so forth as a musician in high school. And my high school band director knew the director of the Navy band that was on tour through Indianapolis. I was able to get a private audition with Commander Brendler. Another one of those fortunate strokes that you didn't realize at the time, the day of the audition I had food poisoning and tonsillitis, and it was not my finest hour.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He listened to me and was very kind, and he says, I don't know, I think you might make it. You're awfully young.
Yeah.
So go ahead and join the Navy, and you'll be right across the river from where we are in Washington, D.C. at the Navy School of Music, and re-audition.
Right.
I thought that sounded like a plan, so I did it.
Yeah.
I got out of boot camp. I went to the School of Music, and I was there for a while, about 2 weeks. There was a plane crash in South America, and I forget how many, I think it was 18 Navy bandsmen were killed.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
I would have been on that plane probably.
Oh, my God.
If I had passed the first audition.
Yeah.
Because I was the junior, I would have been the junior person.
Sure.
So I'm playing funerals in January.
Yeah.
And thinking, oh my goodness, now what? I'm in the Navy. And then I heard about the Naval Academy Band. And there were 2 elite bands in the Navy, the Naval Academy Band and the Navy Band in Washington. When I heard about the Naval Academy Band, I found out that it was a permanent duty station.
Now, this is in Annapolis.
In Annapolis.
Right.
And in fact, I've always been a pretty good salesperson, and as a newspaper carrier, I had won a contest to take a trip to Washington, D.C. and Annapolis. So 10 months earlier, I had heard the Navy Band performing in the just outside the chapel. We used to call them the squirrel concerts when we played them. They had a gazebo out there, and we played at lunch, and there was nobody there but the squirrels and a few people. But I heard it, and then I recognized it, and I thought, well, they were good. So I auditioned for that, and I made it. So in August of 1960, I was in the Naval Academy Band, and while I was there was when I did my college studies.
Right. Fantastic. So you went to the Naval Academy for college.
Which was an interesting experience because now, remember, some of the people that were in the band were Pearl Harbor survivors. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't find out until decades later.
No kidding.
They never spoke about it.
Wow.
We had a concert. We have a concert once a year of alumni. And at one of those concerts, it was the 75th year or whatever after Pearl. Was kind of 75th. It was 60 something. Anyway, whatever the year was, it was a celebration of Pearl Harbor, and bandsmen who had been at Pearl Harbor were recognized. And I was, oh my, I did not know.
Yeah.
They were just associates.
Because they were your peers.
That's right.
Amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
So being the young dude there, I was the same age as the midshipmen. Which made for an interesting situation from time to time.
Wow, what an interesting experience for college. And I bet you were having fun.
I did.
Yeah.
I guess I've got a bit of an ego because I never liked playing second. I could do it, and I could enjoy it, but I liked playing first. And as the junior man in the clarinet section, I could see the hierarchy with 20, 30-year people in front of me. It was never going to be unless I stayed there.
That's right.
So I moved over to saxophone, and I sat next to an incredible sax player, Ernie Jasper. And so sitting there and performing with him was like lessons. 4 days a week, because that's how often we rehearsed. And ironically, when he retired, he recommended me to replace him, so I became the principal saxophone player.
Wow.
And that was a huge reward.
Absolutely.
Because I really enjoyed that instrument. There I was on my first love.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I thoroughly enjoy the clarinet.
Uh-huh.
And so a number of us in the band joined a new initiative in Annapolis. It was called the Annapolis Symphony Orchestra. So I'm one of the charter members of that orchestra, and it still exists.
Wow.
I'm very proud to say.
And you
so I played the clarinet there.
Right.
So I got to play principal clarinet in the symphony and principal saxophone in the Navy, and life was good.
I bet. And how old were you at the time?
When I got the saxophone position, I was 19. And when we started the band, the symphony, I was like 22.
Wonderful.
So I was in my second enlistment.
Amazing. Wonderful.
And I did the symphony for like 20 years.
How long did you stay in the military? How long?
About 10 years. I got out in 1970.
Okay. So it was a love. I mean, you really enjoyed it. You re-upped and you were having a good time. Yeah.
But I felt like I've always been pursuing the completion of myself as a person. And I felt like there was more. That I stayed in the band to avoid going out into the real world. Because, it had come so quickly and so easily.
Sure.
And when I got in the real world, fortunately I'd had the benefit of some good instruction. Dr. Heim, when I was at Maryland, because I was doing my studies at Maryland then. And shortly after that, I did some studies with Harold Wright. What a blessing that was. He was at the National Symphony then, and he's probably one of the finest ever on the instrument. He and Marcellus out of Cleveland are considered two of the giants. And so I kind of felt like I had something going.
Sure.
But what a blow. I failed every audition. I was runner-up.
No kidding. Every time.
Every time. And I felt there's a lesson here. What I didn't know is that's the usual course, and the people I was competing against had been taking auditions for years.
Right.
But I just felt like there was a message being sent.
Yeah.
So I started heading off in other directions, and I was asked to come record music for Muzak purposes by the local radio station, WNAV in Annapolis.
Okay.
The subcarrier on the FM was broadcast to the Safeway stores around the state, actually.
No kidding.
And broadcast from our studio. And then there were two other stations that were owned by the same company. So I began doing that, and how in the world I got into it, I don't know, but I began doing newscasts, and then became the news director. And being in Annapolis, I was where the legislature met. And we were using little handheld tape recorders at the time.
Sure.
And so I was at press conferences. That was during the Vietnam, intense Vietnam public discussion. And I'm trying to think of the senator from Alaska's name, the first one to vote against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. He announced it on the steps there in Annapolis, and I was there with my microphone.
Wow.
Actually, I felt like I really one-upped everybody because I stuck a mic out and he grabbed my mic.
Wow.
Oh, gosh, I wish I could remember his name. But anyway, so there were wonderful moments. And so I could broadcast these things quickly.
Right.
So two of the other stations began rebroadcasting my newscasts twice a day.
Wow.
And then a couple of other stations got involved, and that became the Free State Radio Network. So it was another opportunity.
Yeah. So, Dave, where did you go from there?
Well, that was going on for a while, but there wasn't a whole lot of money in it. And I was still performing with the symphony.
And a lot of work.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, long hours. But a wonderful history and observation of public policy. I guess as I was thinking about this potential interview, I was trying to think, what is it that caused this diversity? And I think my purpose in life is to make a difference and make a contribution. And so I've had the opportunity to do that as a musician and in the public arena from time to time. So during that time, I was doing news, and I was able to broadcast That was during the very intense debate over abortion. There was considerable discussion about whether or not we should have a rail system for Baltimore. I have to share something with you about that, because we hear about media bias. Guilty, because we're human.
Sure.
And so I thought to myself, this needs to happen. This is a good public policy. So I chose, rather than comment on anything, I would interview the person that sounded the least thoughtful and not very well educated, who was opposed to the rail, and someone who was very articulate who was in favor of it. It turned out, I'm going to leave him nameless, that the person that I selected to oppose it was immensely popular.
Oh, no.
So inadvertently, I thwarted my purpose, and it was quite a lesson. So it was time to be sure that I was always in the neutral position when it came to public policy.
That's an interesting story. So where did you go from there? This is quite an adventure, Dave.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So then, while I was doing the radio stint, I had one of my reporters interviewing a slumlord. And even though she requested his permission, and we had that on tape, she didn't record it on the beep line. And that's the law. I broadcast it.
Oh, Lord.
He protested. I got canned. And I should have.
Yeah. But that was an honest mistake.
Doesn't matter. It's the
Doesn't
law.
matter. That's the law. Okay.
You know, if you run a light, you don't know the rules,
Yeah.
it's still the law.
Yeah.
So, again, another lesson. I should have known. So, I guess the thing that I felt was I was letting something go out that needed to go out, because they were fairly incriminating things that he was saying.
Sure.
Self-incriminating.
Yeah.
And they were broadcast. And I paid the price.
Yeah.
If I had it to do over again, I probably would not have chosen that course.
Right.
So you learn from those experiences. So I've learned a lot during that period. But while I was at it, I was working in covering people. I was very impressed with then Clerk of Court Marjorie Holt. She ran for office because I'd gotten fired from the radio station. I was free to help out on the campaign, and she won. So I became her press aide.
Okay. Oh. So one door closed and another one opened.
It always does.
Yes, it does. Okay.
And while I was there, I got a little bit too full of myself again. I decided I can do this, so I ran for office and lost.
Sounds like your auditions.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, and I think in the losses, not only were there lessons, it wasn't meant to be, because there's things that I do well that don't flourish with the voters, because oftentimes I'll be politically incorrect,
right,
because I think it's the right thing. And I realized and recognized how important it is to elected officials to keep the voter in mind, so I don't hold that against them when they hold back on things because they have to by political necessity. So a lot of lessons.
Yeah. So what happened next?
Well, after I lost that race, that was in the primary, I was able to turn around and help Senator Cade win his seat and became his legislative aide.
No kidding.
So another door opened.
Okay.
While I was doing that, I had another amazing opportunity to witness. I'm a Republican lifelong, and I'm working for all these Republicans. And I remember Senator Hall, Ed Hall from Calvert County, and Senator Bailey from down in St. Mary's County, and Senator Cade. And Senator Cade had been first a budget person at Westinghouse, lent to Anne Arundel County to help draft their charter. Then he was elected to be on the first councilman board. So he was a county councilman for years. Then he went back to Westinghouse, I guess it was, and campaigned for Senate and won. He was so smart on budget figures. As a Republican, the Democrats put him in as a chair of one of the major fiscal committees, financial committees.
No kidding.
Because of his expertise. And the thing with Jack was, Senator Cave, Jack Cave, there was never any guessing. How in the world he got it through the voters, I don't know. There was a guy that always told it like it was and got away with it.
Yeah.
Because he was so thoughtful and authoritative,
right.
No one dared question him.
Yeah.
So I can remember one time that I sent him a memo, for example, as a staff person, and it came back with corrections for spelling and punctuation. I mean, he was that detailed and that thoughtful. And so when it came to budget figures, there was no putting anything past him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then his successor later on, Bobby Neal, followed in that same pattern, and he too, as a Republican, became a chair of the Finance Committee.
But he was trusted.
That's
because
right.
His figures were always correct.
That's right. And both sides of the aisle respected them.
Yeah.
I'd love to see more of that.
We don't see much of that today, and it's sad. It's sad that it seems like the parties just can't or don't want to get along, and that's too bad.
But this too shall pass.
Yes. Now, where were you living during this time?
Always in Annapolis.
Still in Annapolis. Okay.
And quite often on the water. Very involved with sailing. I got into sailboat racing, and that was fabulous. Oh, it's great. And then when I got through with all of that stuff, I went into the car business.
Okay.
I'd always been a car buff.
Okay. Since your drag racing days in the 50s.
Yes.
Yeah, you watched.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'd always had interesting cars. I had 1950 MGA. Of the cars I've had that I wish I still had, I had a 2 4-barrel carburetor push-button shift Plymouth Fury, Golden Fury. Those cars would be a fortune today.
Wonderful cars.
Yeah. So I went in the car business, and immediately that worked. And I stayed in it 14 years while I continued to perform on the side.
So you were a natural salesperson, always?
Communicator.
Okay. That works.
Because a salesperson, too many times, is a manipulative person, and they can't get out of that. What I felt I was doing best was listening to what the customer told me and trying to match up the product to their desires. I'll give you an example. When I was in at one dealership, people came in asking for a specific Honda Accord with this equipment on it. I said, okay, that's fine. Now, why did you pick that car? Well, what business is that of yours? I said, I was just trying to match up what you were wanting. Well, they actually wanted a Volkswagen, and we sold those.
Yeah.
But they wanted to see if we were competitive on the Honda, because that's all they'd shopped.
Right.
If anybody had stopped to ask that question, they'd have found out what they wanted.
Right.
So I sold them a car.
Yeah.
So I feel better about doing it that way
sure.
than knowing all the tricks.
Yeah. And then you know that the customer walks out the door with what they really wanted, what
Correct.
they really desired. And they're going to be happier. They're more likely to come back. They're more likely to
Great
recommend
referral
you.
business.
Absolutely. Recommend you to others. Sure. So you did cars for a while.
14 years.
Still living in Annapolis.
For a while, then I was asked to work at a dealership in Frederick.
Okay.
And moved to Figgyville.
Okay. Where is that?
Figgyville is just off of 340. It's the home of Come On Fred, which was a racehorse.
Okay.
A trotter.
Okay.
Just the other side of Frederick City, out in the boonies. And we had the Grange Hall down there had a fundraiser every year. And there are three things. You paid $1 to ride in a hay wagon on Come On Fred's workout track.
Okay.
That was one option. The other was this really loudmouth young lady, who knew how to hit the buttons of all the young guys, and she was in the dunk tank.
Oh, no.
And she would just leer at them, and you guys couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, blah, 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 and they'd be so furious. Of course, they'd throw so hard because they really wanted to dunk her.
Yeah, and they'd
miss.
Yeah,
and she knew it.
Spending more and more dollars.
That's right. She was a wonderful fundraiser. And when we played bingo, we used corn, shelled corn.
Yeah.
Kernels.
Right. Wow. Okay, so what was next?
While I was doing that, I was working at a Fiat BMW Subaru dealership there. And I'd always been a salesperson. But, you know, I'm always trying to better. So I went to the Tisher company as a salesperson, but with the understanding that I wanted to get into management. And so I moved there and did real well there. That's where I flourished. I made a ton of money. It was a big company. They did wonderful things. I mean, you could eat on the floor in the garage.
Wow.
You know, it was a very German auto house, you know, kind of thing.
Sure.
And Rudy Tisher was a mechanic, and so that was his thing, and he owned the company. Actually, it was fascinating, too, because Christian von Berg was the general manager, and we were same age. So I remember he said we were sitting around having conversation one night late, and he was talking about his uncle being shot down in France. And I had to think about that. That would have been the Luftwaffe.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was an amazing cultural exchange.
Wow.
And you remember that plane crash I told you about?
Yes.
Okay.
In South America.
I was having lunch one time with the comptroller, Marge, and asked about her background. And she was a widow of a Navy airman.
Oh, my gosh. That's creepy.
Oh, it is.
It's such a small world.
It truly is. If you ask, it's amazing how many connections that we can have.
Incredible.
Yes.
Wow.
So that was wonderful, and they promoted me to management when they brought in the Saab dealership, the Saab franchise, and then later the Land Rover franchise. So I started those two up, and they went very well. So then I was moved over to the Porsche Audi franchise, and that was my love.
Yeah.
And I got to drive all those neat cars as part of my job.
Sure.
But there was a downside. The hours got longer. The days got longer. We were open from 9 to 9 as management. I pretty much had to be there at that time.
Sure. Wow.
We ended up staying past closing hours many times.
I'm sure.
Then Saturdays were 9 to 6, then 9 to 9. Then they were starting on Sundays. So I left there and I went to O'Donnell over in Ellicott City. And meanwhile, while I was making all that money, I had moved to Carroll County, to New Windsor.
Okay. So you moved to New Windsor about what year?
1984.
Okay.
And bought a home that had been left to deteriorate a good period of time, and it needed renovation. And so my then wife and I moved in there, and she had a marvelous artistic eye, and we had the cash. So we really did a great job of restoring that house.
Wonderful.
And it was on tour 3 times.
No kidding.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The Heritage Committee had older home tours there, and that still are being done. And one time a Sun Paper reporter was there and did a feature story on the house. And so it was wonderful. And I got very involved in the community. I was in the Lions Club. I had quit playing. When I moved into that house, and I was making that kind of money in the car business and enjoying it, flourishing.
Right.
I said, you know what? It's time to put the horns away.
Yeah.
So I did.
So you stopped playing music.
I played the final performance with the Indianapolis Symphony and performed one of my signature pieces that I had performed since high school was the first Premier Rhapsody by Debussy, a wicked piece and a beautiful piece. I played that. When I went home, the horns were put away with the Indianapolis Symphony. That was my final appearance with them.
And what year was that?
1984.
And you moved to New Windsor. And you became a gentleman farmer. Whatever.
No, there were 4.5 acres.
Yeah. Okay.
I was working so hard in the car business, and it was paying off. So that was good.
Are you still in New Windsor?
No.
Okay.
My wife and I divorced. She kept the house, and I moved to Tawnytown, which is where I now reside. And it's been fabulous. Well, again, I like these older homes.
Yeah.
This home was built in 1914.
Wow.
It's brick, has a wraparound porch, has amazing. Some of the construction of that era, you have real 2x6s.
Sure. Oh, yes.
As beams.
Yes.
Then you have a subflooring. Then you have the decorative flooring on top of that. That is beautiful hardwoods with gorgeous grains.
Yes.
With the craftsmen put in, just the window frames have the formation of the wood centered. There's a faux fireplace. Again, the same thing.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
and we thoroughly enjoy it.
We
I say we. I've now remarried.
Good.
And I have a very large new family.
Wonderful.
Connie, my wife, was born and raised in Middleburg with 6 brothers and sisters, 3 of each, that all have children and many grandchildren.
Okay.
And when I married Connie, I inherited stepchildren who are grown and married.
Wonderful.
And have children.
Okay.
So I now have
a huge extended family.
A wonderful family.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. Her son James and his wife Sandy live here in Westminster, and Samantha and AJ are their children, and Heather lives in Lejeune, and her husband's a career Marine, and Morgan is their granddaughter, or is their daughter, my granddaughter, and that's been a very intense situation because Matt is the Marine, career Marine, drill instructor, but speaks multiple languages.
Wow.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
Was in Iraq and was shot in the chest.
Wow.
Survived, went back, and is now deployed in Afghanistan. And that's what you do as a career Marine.
Amazing.
And he does amazing things. He leaves notes behind in drawers that they will find over the period of time. He sent a little cuddle bear, this big Marine, to his daughter with a recording of his voice.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I mean, he's an amazing man.
Yeah.
Well, all of them are. James does a lot of work with IT kind of work, with media centers for homes. His wife works at T. Rowe Price as, I guess, a vice president there now. I mean, they're thriving. Yeah. Heather, Matt's wife, is in social service at Lejeune. Everybody's thriving. Yeah.
Let's back up a little bit and go back to when you were in the car business and in New Windsor. What got you out of that? When did you get back into music? I'm trying to get back to that piece of it.
In the 70s, I had a student, Tim Lester, and his brother, Noel, now the chair of the music department at Hood, and I performed together for a fundraiser for the Indianapolis Symphony. And it was magical. We had one rehearsal, because that's all it was. It was a last-minute thing. Somebody had dropped out. We had to fill the gap. And the chemistry was great. So, fast forward 20-some years, he's the head of the music department at Hood. I have decided to get out of the car business because it was just too consuming. There was no life. And I went to WTTR as the sales manager there. And it was while I was there that Noel asked me to come do a recital with him at Hood.
Okay.
This was in '92.
But you hadn't played.
That's what I told him.
Yeah.
And it was a tough piece. Yeah. It was Shepherd on the Rock by Schubert for piano, clarinet, and soprano. Oh, yeah. And Heather Ross was the soprano. She now directs operas in Europe, and she's an amazing performer, and Noel is too.
Yeah.
He said you could do it. I said, well, here goes. And it worked. I got back on the horse, and in about 2 months, I was at a level where I could deliver a reasonable performance, which shocked me.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So he asked me to start teaching there, and so it began. So in '92, I started my real effort at teaching. Back in the 70s, when I was teaching his brother, Tim, I had some incredible students, but I could tell some vignettes about some of those experiences, because when you're a private instructor, you're one-on-one with young people. And in addition to the music, a connection either occurs and they stay, or it doesn't and they leave.
Exactly.
When it does, it grows and you become extended family. And so I began again in '92 and was teaching at Hood, and then I started teaching at Coffee Music after I walked in to buy some reeds, and was asked if I would teach clarinet there, clarinet and saxophone. And so then I was doing more of that. And that was now starting to compete for my time. So I finally ended up dropping out of New Windsor Lions because I needed more time for teaching.
Sure.
And now, I guess at the peak of my number of students, it was close to 50.
Wow.
And I currently have around 30.
That's a busy schedule.
So some of those are college students, and the majority of them are from the community. They call it the prep music program at Hood and the community music program at McDaniel.
Wow.
And in 98, I guess it was, yes, I was asked to come teach at McDaniel. And so what goes along with that are wonderful peers, and you perform with them. Just did a double woodwind quintet performance at both McDaniel and Hood from some of the collaborators that I have from faculty at both places.
Right.
And each of us had our own quintet.
Yeah.
So we did a concert of each of us playing a piece, and then we came together and did a double quintet piece, which is hard to do because it's a lot of people, and there's not a lot of money.
Right.
We did it without a conductor, with 10 independent thinkers.
Oh my!
That know how to play chamber music and know how to collaborate, and those kinds of things are rewarding on a level that no amount of money that you can't measure in money.
Right. Very rewarding.
And then the students. I guess I'll start with one that you and I have shared experience with. Daniel Andrews studied with me. Oh my goodness, he hates for me to say this, but too bad. I remember when he was in diapers, his mom Rachel and I were teaching at Coffee back in '92. And years later she asked if I would take him on as a student, as a saxophone student. And so I had Daniel as a saxophone student from age 10 through age 18. So for 8 years he was a student. And oh my.
He's probably the perfect student because he's driven to perform his instrument. He worked very hard, and he had the support of his mother, who encouraged him. I want to use the word mercilessly, but it's not like that. She just was always there to support him in his endeavor, and that's part of the deal. If the parents aren't supportive, and I know you've run into this before, it's awfully hard for the passion of the student to blossom.
It's critical.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a 3 examples, and we'll finish with the one with Daniel. Not only his mom, but his grandparents. Because his grandfather was a violinist that chose between playing in the Baltimore Symphony or teaching and raising a family, and chose to raise the family.
Right.
And so they were all there behind him financially, and they were. The thing that Rachel brought to the table is that Daniel just lives to pick up that horn and play. It wasn't something that is compulsive, obsessive.
No,
it's
not at
all. It just flows.
Yes.
And so he would get up and think about what he was going to do with the instrument. And to this day, that's what he does.
Yeah.
And his mom saw to it that there was a path to make that happen.
She had every opportunity to
And she was an accompanist.
Absolutely.
Accomplished accompanist.
One of the best I've ever worked with.
I've worked with her too.
Yeah.
So Daniel is at the University of Miami, and he has a full scholarship from the Stamp family Memorial Fund that pays for a quintet of incoming freshmen who are going to perform together throughout their career there in the jazz music program at Miami. And they do tours, they compose. Daniel is just thriving.
Yes.
And he will have he has every prospect of being a wonderful story.
Absolutely.
Then I had another student from Italy. His name was Tommaso Lonquich. And Tommaso's father was stationed at Dietrich, or not stationed, but took a job at Dietrich in research. And so he came to me as a Hood student. By the end, he won full scholarship to several colleges, and he had a 50% scholarship to Princeton. But he selected Maryland because all the money the family had put together for him for college stayed there.
Right.
Because he was in the top program. we had him going to Brevard Music Center for the summers. The clarinet teacher there, and this is the network thing, knows Lauren Kitt from the National Symphony, who's the top teacher at Maryland.
Right.
So the summer before Tommaso went to Maryland, he was prepping for the auditions. With his talent and accomplishment, he was on a level with the graduates. So he was playing in all the elite music groups there at Maryland. He's now back in Europe. His father is now teaching there. And actually, after Connie and I got married, they invited us over to use their home for 2 weeks in Florence, Italy. And so we got to see Rome and Venice. It snowed in Venice while we were there.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
It was a hoot.
Yeah.
I went to a church where the first performance of the Four Seasons by Vivaldi, and I'm thinking, here I am in the composer's home, and it was amazing.
What an experience.
And he is doing solo work over there and doing his graduate work in Spain. His father is an accomplished pianist, and so he's getting into the top venues there. I've had other students like that from Carroll County, and I could go on and on about this because I've got several of them going now. One of my latest, that Frederick Symphony Orchestra competition, Griff Urich just won it. That's a concerto competition, and each year it's for a group of instruments, and so my students qualify when it's the winds and brass. And I was very delighted that in both occasions, 3 of the 5 finalists were my students.
Wow.
And the winners were my students.
Wow, great.
And Griff is going to UNBC now as an electrical engineering major and clarinet performance minor.
No kidding.
And he plans to do some composing, but he's brilliant. And here is proof positive of that connection between the sciences and math and music.
Absolutely.
When we're studying rhythm, I'm talking about it as periods of time and how we manage it.
Right.
And that's what counting is.
Sure.
And it sounds so fundamental, but when they get into the experience, they start to make a connection between calculations and reality, the theoretical and the real.
Sure.
So they're not always, these wonderful musicians and these wonderful talents aren't always going to be just musicians. And I guess in some ways I kind of find that a reflection, because that's sort of what I'm doing.
Yes.
Because I still have a business as well as my teaching.
Right. Dave, you've been teaching for how long?
Oh, let's see, probably 25 years accumulated with a 20-some year break. So for that period of time. I started again in 1992, and I'm never going to quit again.
Okay, so now you're teaching at Hood, you're teaching at McDaniel College, you have a lot of private
Carroll
students.
Community College.
Carroll Community College. What do you see Dave Duree doing in his future? Continuing to teach, of course.
In my life now, I have 2 somewhat competing endeavors. But what I've decided is that music is going to remain the priority. The business is wonderful, because in that case I still feel like I'm making a difference, because I'm doing innovative wastewater systems. I'm helping planners find ways to put communities where they should be, where there isn't water and sewer, but it'll make it work. And so they've got new options for planning they didn't have. Homeowners that are using septic systems, we put out nitrogen that just keeps on going to the groundwater, to the bay, or to a drinking water. And there's a new program that we all pay into to fund upgrades of those systems to help protect us. And so I'm participating in all that. But the priority for me, making a difference in both arenas, is going to remain music. And I see that as a permanent thing until I'm on my deathbed.
Good for you. I always conclude my interviews with 2 questions. But before I do that, do you have any other stories that you'd like to share?
Oh my goodness, I could talk about stories forever.
Anything that you have to tell me?
I don't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay. First question is this. What are the biggest changes that you've seen in Carroll County since you first moved to New Windsor in, was it 1984?
Yes.
Since 1984, what are the the most profound changes that you've seen in the county?
Well, obviously growth.
Mm-hmm.
When I came here, Cranberry Mall was just starting up,
Mm-hmm.
and it's now Town Center.
Right.
There was only one mall before that, and that was Westminster
Mm-hmm.
Shopping Center.
Right.
Downtown still had some of the old stores there. Mathers was still there. It's now Coffee Music.
Right.
You see now that the shopping centers and the big box stores have had their impact, and then the voids that are there are being recognized in our downtown area. So I'm seeing revitalization in Westminster and Sykesville and some of the other towns. I think it's coming to our town in Tawnytown as soon as that construction is done. We're doing the streetscape, and it's been a year and a half, and we have another 6 months to go.
Sure.
So revitalization of the downtowns. I'm seeing a different makeup of the county with the agricultural history, and the small town history being impacted by the folks who came here to share that experience, but altered it at the same time. And I think that there has been a merger in that case, and many times you see it where the new folks come in and turn over and dominate it. And in this case, the people who moved here came here for what was here and have tried to preserve that where possible. And, you know, with our agricultural preservation program as one of the leaders in the country, that's amazing. So I think, for me, the change that disappoints me, that I was hoping for, was charter government. Because to me, the commissioner form of government has too many checks and not enough balances. And I think a structure similar to what our towns have and our state government has would benefit the county. That's my personal opinion.
Right. Okay. Last question. And this is a question I always ask everybody at the end of every interview. If you've been around a good long while, you've got a lot of history, a lot of experience, a lot of adventures, you've made a lot of mistakes, you've had a lot of successes. If you were going to offer a piece of advice to a young person today, man or woman, who was getting ready they're finishing their education and getting ready to start a career or getting ready to start a family, and in this case, this is going to be a two-pronged question. I want to know what kind of advice would you have them for starting their life, but then I want you to talk a little bit about a person who was going to start a career in music. So first of all, just in general, you have advice for a young person who's getting ready to start a career in a family.
I think for any person at any stage of life, the earlier you can tune in to your inner voice, the better. Because when we're doing what we're built to do, we do it best. And oftentimes we're conflicted by pushes by family or culture to be something different than we are. And when we pursue that, ultimately it will be frustrating and expensive. And opportunities will be missed. So tune into your inner voice. When you find a defeat or setback, it's not comprehensive. It's one battle in the lifelong experience, and you'll lose some. But in that loss, you can also see a learning experience that hopefully will help you get more in tune with your inner voice.
Very good. Now, if a young person was planning a career in music, and they're getting ready to graduate from high school or college, or even before that, they think that they want to grow up to be a musician, what advice would you give them?
Music today offers a wide venue of opportunities. I'm going to start with one of the more bizarre. There's a young Jewish fellow, that grew up wanting to be a rock star. I never can remember his name. So he went along and learned the guitar and learned some singing, and then went away from his faith and went out into the world. And somewhere along the line, decided that he needed to get back to his faith, and is now a practicing Hadassic Jew.
Okay.
But he also fills stadiums with Hadassic Jewish rap.
No kidding.
And all my kids know about him. I don't.
Wow, yeah, amazing.
Now, I don't say that we're all going to take that kind of bizarre turns and see that incredible result. But there's someone that finally got back to his inner voice.
Right.
So then I have students that have gotten out of college that went into radio, that their experience in the arts has led them in other venues.
Sure.
So that when they're going to go to college and major in music, they may still find that experience qualifies them for some other direction.
Absolutely.
When I have students who are preparing for college, we look ahead and find out what the audition requirements are while they're juniors in high school. Because if you think about it after you've graduated,
it's too late.
Well, it's not, never it's too late,
Well,
but you've got a real steep hill to climb.
You've really got to run fast.
You're going to be way behind Tommaso.
Yeah. So plan ahead.
Plan ahead.
How much time should a student rehearse? I know this is a crazy question.
It's not a crazy question. The question is how to define preparation, which is my word for practice. If you're paying for lessons, and my students, I'll bring this up every so often, you're paying me $25 for this 30 minutes.
Right.
You only got $5 worth because I've been supervising your practice.
Yeah.
So they need to structure practice as homework, like
Right.
they would for their school subjects. And if they're paying for lessons and they don't want to practice, that's a message to themselves.
Sure.
Okay, so then I encourage them to set aside 30 minutes for students that are developing, and set aside an initial time, a principal time, and a backup time. Always have a backup plan, because today's schedules are so complex that the backup time may become 50% of your practice option. And if you don't have that, when your original time's gone, you got no place.
Right.
So make a place, carve out time as a priority of your planning. Then, if you're starting to catch on and music is meaning more to you, then practice every chance you get. And many schools are providing study time for practice. And the student finds themselves practicing instead of, now here you have choices. I can't do volleyball anymore. I can't do field hockey. I can't do football. Or I'm going to do football and I can't do this, music. And so those become choices. And as you make those choices, you're setting the stage for your future.
But again, follow your inner voice. Find your passion and follow it, and things will usually work out.
You'll do your best.
Right.
Now, you may not be the best, but you'll be your best.
Yes.
And to me, from my personal life experience, I'm probably happier now than I've ever been, and life is more fulfilling now than it's ever been, because I'm doing everything I wish to do. And the price that I've paid in terms of income that could have been more or less, things that I can't do that I would like to do, they're worth it.
But you're happier.
Oh, I am.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Dave, I want to thank you so very much for coming in this morning to talk to me. What a wonderful interview. It's really been a pleasure.
Pleasure's been mine. I have to say, though, there's a number of subjects I would have preferred to talk about besides myself.
Oh, that's okay. It was very good. What a wonderful adventure. Thanks
Thank you.
a lot.